All right, hello everyone. We are here for interview number 6. My guest today is Pastor Allan from Ashland First United Methodist here in town. Pastor Allan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't you kind of give everyone a quick backstory into you, how long you've been in ministry, and just a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I am a native of northeastern Ohio, and I have been a pastor for 35 years. I was 36 soon, which I can't believe it's been that long.
Wow.
I've also spent about 25 years as an adjunct professor here at Ashland Seminary, teaching theology and ethics and some Bible courses. I was fortunate to work on my doctorate in England overseas, which was a real wonderful experience for me, a wonderful international experience.
Yeah.
And I've also done short-term mission work and teaching work, particularly now I've been working in Zimbabwe, and for probably now, actually I did my first teaching stint back in the fall there for 2 weeks. But
that's very cool.
I'm actually teaching in the Methodist Seminary in Havana, Cuba for many years now. So I've been going there. 4 children, and 2 of them are married, and we have 4 little granddaughters. And let's see. I think we can stop there for the moment.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. Just quickly kind of starting off, what have been some of the challenges to try to stay connected to kind of your church community and with everything kind of going on? Obviously, people can't come out of the church. The office hours are changing just because of our social distancing. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you guys have kind of had to overcome and the way you've evolved to tackle some of these things?
Well, I think just the challenge of trying to continue a sense of church is still active, and church is still doing something in the midst of this time that we've not really shut down completely, and we want to make sure that our parishioners know that. And so we have kept in contact via Zoom meetings, our Bible studies. We have 2 each week, and we've been doing that Zoom meeting by a Zoom meeting. We've not canceled those. We have our Celebrate Recovery ministry on Wednesday nights that has not met for the first couple of weeks, although we certainly have had people available to talk to those who feel like they need support on the phone. But starting this Wednesday evening, we're actually going to do our group time in Zoom meeting as well. So
very cool.
Zoom has been a wonderful way for us to keep in contact. I'll do video updates, try and do them once or twice a week, and we post that on social media. Plus, we also then email the link out to everybody in the church that has an email address. We make phone calls to people. We have our shut-in list and our list of older folks that we feel like we should keep in contact with. To call them once a week or so and just make sure they're okay, see how they're doing, see if there's anything they want to talk about, see if they need anything that perhaps we can get for them. So those are the ways in which we're just trying. We're still doing some of our ministry. Last week I went out and delivered some groceries. It was our week for Project Access to get groceries to some of their folks, and so I did that, and did it the social distancing way, left it at the door, knocked on the door.
Right.
So there's certain things we're doing out that we can do in a social distancing way, but those are just ways in which we have tried to just let folks know, hey, we're still in business, although business looks different.
Right. Yeah. And kind of building off of that, I know obviously in times like this, kind of turning to God or looking for answers can sometimes be difficult, especially in circumstances that are very unknown. And what would be some of the things or some of the takeaways that you've even had? Maybe it's through your own experience with something like this, to just kind of, whether it's.
I think it is naturally human in some ways, and maybe even modern in some ways, to want to find an answer for everything. And I'm not sure there are answers for everything. And I don't, I'm not one of those persons who asks the question, what is God teaching us in this? Because I don't think that that's what's going on. I don't think God has sent this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think pandemics happen. Happen from time to time. Think of the flu. The flu happens every year, and we know that. And we know that there will be people who will die from it, but no one every year says, why is God sending us the flu, right?
Right.
This is a unique situation, of course, something we're not used to, but I think what we need to try to avoid as much as we want to is some very deep, profound answers as to why this has happened, because I don't think there are deep, profound answers. What I think is important in this time is to remember that in the midst of it, that God is with us, that God cares for us and God loves us. God is not sending this because we've done anything bad or wrong. I mean, we've done many things wrong, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But it isn't that God is punishing us for anything in particular. So we need to be careful about those kinds of things. I just think that we are to be reminded that in Jesus, God is present with us and loves us and cares for us. And that our task as Christians, those of us who follow Jesus, is to demonstrate that love in every way that we can. And part of the way that we do that is simply in this time to stay at home if we can, if we're some of those persons who are fortunate enough. And then also to find ways to support those who are on the front lines of this, who can't stay at home, who are at risk.
Right.
So some people. One of the things some people are fond of saying, everything happens for a reason, and I really am not a subscriber to that. I mean, I think everything happens for a reason. I mean, if I'm clumsy and I trip over my feet and fall, that the reason is I was clumsy.
Right.
But there's no profound divine reason for everything. I don't.
Gotcha.
So I think everything happens for a reason. I mean, everything happens in some profound way. I think we need to be careful of that kind of theology, because first of all, I don't think it's right, but secondly, I don't think it's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely subscribe to that as well. But for you, I think kind of talking about this, everything happens for a reason, and kind of this hopefulness that I think we're all kind of looking for. Do you think that sometimes we may struggle, and you kind of touched on this, but struggle with the things that we don't understand, so we may become almost overly hopeful in the way that we use all of the motivational verses, or the things that are just I don't know if I'm wording this correctly, but just taking that God's hope and that love and that protection, and almost diving so far into it where we think that everything is going to be okay, even though things can be very scary and hard right now. And that even just acknowledging that and could be something more helpful for us, and maybe something that we need a little bit more than just the verses that make us feel good or different things like that. I don't know if there's a question in that, but
there's, and absolutely Christians should hope. I mean,
definitely.
Faith is hope in what Jesus has done for us in the resurrection, and that God does work in the midst of these times. And I want to be very careful when I say things like God didn't cause us or God didn't send us. I'm not suggesting God isn't working here. That God is working in the midst of this and providing comfort and hope and care to people in these times. So God is working in this. And I do think we need to hang on to hope. But hope, the Christian hope, doesn't mean that in the interim that everything is always going to work out okay, be okay. The reality is, when we get through this pandemic, there will be people who have died. There will be people who have lost loved ones. There will be people who may not have died, but perhaps, we're going to have to deal in the aftermath of this with people who perhaps lost their livelihood, their businesses. Their businesses couldn't take, they financially couldn't take the long interim of the shutdown. So there's people who perhaps were looking at retirement in 6 months and will have to put that off because of their pensions or whatever. And so hope does not mean or does not minimize the fact that there are going to be casualties of this. It's hope that speaks to the cat, that gives comfort and gives a sense of we can continue on in the midst of the casualty. So hope doesn't mean flowery words that ignore what's happening. It's hope that enters into that suffering. And so I think we do need to be careful about presenting hope as a way that diminishes the suffering of people. I mean, how can we, as Christians, diminish the significance of that when the cross stands at the center of our faith? At the center of our faith stands Jesus, who suffered horrendously and died on a cross. And so we simply cannot, we use hope as a way to minister in the midst of suffering, not to deny that suffering is happening.
That's great. I always enjoy talking to you because I always learn something new. So that's a good thing. And so kind of building off of that, what would be some of, I mean, for you and just kind of the balancing act of, for some of us that as we kind of have those doubts and as they come up, what kind of words would you be able to give to some people that we can kind of use to deal with those, or still kind of have that connection, and maybe even if it's healthy to be asking those doubts or having those doubts right now, and ways that we can kind of deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, look, doubt exists, and doubt in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. I reject the idea that faith is the absence of doubt. Now, certainly there are doubts that can be unhealthy.
Sure.
And we want to be careful about that. But at the same time, and I think of Paul, like I said to the Corinthians, we see through a glass darkly, we see in a mirror dimly. We don't know everything. We're this side of perfection. And so having some doubts, questions, is never a bad thing. And in fact, I think Descartes' famous saying, faith is fashioned in the workshop of doubt. I think that was Descartes. That it's the questions that cause us to seek and cause us to do more in reference to trying to at least answer some things, knowing that not everything can be answered. So I think, for me, my faith is centered and focused on the resurrection of Jesus. And because I believe Jesus has been raised from the dead, then that puts everything else in perspective, even my questions, even when the doubts that sometimes I have about certain things. So I don't think that is a bad thing. I think, by the way, there are scriptures that help us think through this. I mean, I recommend the lament psalms. I mean, there's lots of psalms which the psalmist is not happy, which the psalmist is suffering, or the psalmist sees suffering, or there's things going on, and the psalmist isn't, ignoring that, but using it and lamenting to God. Why is this happening? I don't understand what's going on, and those kinds of things. So I would say to people, in this time, if you're anxious and if you want to identify with some of the biblical writers on this, read some of the lament psalms that are there. Read, and again, yesterday's lectionary text for the Gospels was Jesus praising Lazarus. And of course, while that story has a happy ending, I guess you could say, the whole narrative is so instructive for us, because Jesus gets to Bethany. Lazarus has been dead for 2 days. Mary comes out to give Jesus a piece of her mind. If you had been here, my brother would have died. I mean, there's pain and suffering.
Right.
Jesus minimized that, and in fact, when Jesus gets to the tomb, we're told that Jesus weeps bitterly. Great question is, why is Jesus weeping? And so, we can speculate all we want, but the text doesn't tell us. But the point is that Jesus enters into this terrible scene of mourning and grief and death. And, he doesn't offer platitudes and words. He does engage Mary in conversation, but and I think that for the church, the task here is to acknowledge that people are suffering. Our task is to enter into that and be a suffering presence. And sometimes just being is more important than even doing. But, you and I, I've seen this all the time, dealing with funerals.
Sure.
We tend to want to make everything okay, right? We want to meet the grief of those who are suffering. And that's understandable. I mean, we want things to be okay. But we then try to offer trite little platitudes that frankly don't work.
Right.
And one best thing to do is to say I'm sorry, or say nothing and just be there, be a presence. I still remember many years ago a woman in the church I served previously, whose husband had passed away a couple years before I got there, so I never knew him. But I can remember a conversation one night with her. She said one of the most significant moments for her in her grief was when a neighbor friend of hers came down and just sat with her. She said, we didn't talk. We didn't say a word to each other. We just sat there. She said that was so meaningful to me.
Right.
She just sat there with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just being a presence is a task for us as the church.
Yeah.
I don't know if I really answered the question or not. I just kind of got going.
No, I don't know either, but I definitely liked where it ended up, because I think that's kind of an important thing too. And I think with my journey, and you kind of know, like as it's kind of starting up here, is one of the big things of, I think sometimes we look at God has to have all these answers and he has to give us all these answers. And we think because he would have the power to fix everything that he should in our minds, right? But sometimes that's just being present with him and feeling that presence and just experiencing everything that we are. And one of the biggest things, and we've discussed this, but one of the biggest things that you said to me was just like, no question is off limits for God. And I think that's just super important right now, because no questions off limits. It doesn't mean that we're going to get the answer that we want either, but maybe just touch on that a little bit and kind of your thoughts on that and why you said that.
Yeah, I think that maybe in some church traditions, certain questions are off limits because I think people are afraid to engage that question because it might undermine their faith. They've got a certain understanding of the faith, and they're afraid to have to encounter questions for which they really don't want to know the answer.
Right.
I grew up in this kind of a context. My parents were not like that. I mean, I was always able to raise questions in the home. But, I was raised in church traditions where perplexing questions were always, the response was, we'll pray about it, right?
Yep.
Which in prayer is important, don't get me wrong. We ought to pray about these things, but
right.
It's a way of deflecting. It's a way of not having to engage.
Yeah.
Question. For me, if all truth is God's truth, and I believe that, I mean, where else would truth come from but from God? If all truth is God's truth, then there's no question that that is a threat to God. There's no question that God is incapable of handling. Now, again, as you rightly say, doesn't mean that every question I have is going to be answered this side of eternity. But there are no questions, and we ought to feel free to raise those questions, just as we ought to feel free to be honest with God in prayer. And again, I would go back to the lament songs, where the psalmist is praying to God and is expressing, his anger, his frustration. I don't think we should hold back if this is how we're feeling. But I also know that in this time, there are going to be questions for which there is either no answer or no good answer. And that's okay. One of the things I do not feel that as a pastor, I do not feel the need to always know the answer to a question.
Mm.
I don't. I try my best to help people talk through it and work through it.
Yeah.
And certainly, I'm not suggesting that there aren't answers to questions. There are certainly plenty of answers to plenty of questions in life. But
Sure.
But I also don't feel that faith is the truth of the faith is dependent upon my ability to answer every question.
Mm.
And I don't think we should necessarily think that either. That it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to be a seeker. I've always been a seeker from the time I was young.
Yeah.
It's okay to be a seeker, but I think that there is a journey in the seeking that, frankly, is probably almost more important than always the answer, right?
Yeah.
That we may, at the end of the day, may not have a good answer, but boy, we had a lot of fun traveling together, seeking the answer and having
Right.
fun. There's something about Shakespeare's old line that to the journey, there's something very satisfying, even if we're not sure what the answer is.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great insight. And just kind of wrapping up for you, if you just kind of had to have a blanket statement, I know I'm kind of teeing you up here with a lot of generalness, but what would kind of just be some advice or just kind of your thoughts on the whole situation to kind of help us as we journey through kind of together the unknown waters that we find ourselves in, to maybe help or just give us some good things to think about?
I would quote, I guess I would quote John Wesley's last words, his dying words. The best of all is God is with us. And that is true in this time. It's true in every time. It's true when things are great. It's true when things are not so good.
Mm-hmm.
That the hope that we have is found in the fact that God is present and that God has already acted on our behalf in Jesus Christ. Trying to think who said it, I can't remember, but it's one of my favorite lines, and that is this: the worst that can happen to us cannot compare to the best that God has already accomplished for us in Jesus Christ.
Hmm.
So, what is God doing? Well, God has already done.
Yeah.
Already acted for us in Jesus, and that's the hope that we have.
Right.
So that's what I would say, and continue to also do our best in this time to ask, what can we do? And for some of us, maybe all we can do is stay at home, and that's, I still say that, if loving God and loving others is what God wants us to do, loving others, then this is a great way to love others by staying home. I mean, it's a great way to fulfill the commandment, love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
And I have the luxury of being able to do that. And so I'm going to do that and be very careful. And I'm only going to go out when I absolutely need to.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Pastor Allan. It's always good to talk to you and have a conversation. Yeah, of course. So thank you. And we will talk to you soon.
All right. Take care.
Awesome. Thanks.